to welcome you to the marriage series, The Tie That Binds. Today the topic is going to be male and female. What does it mean to live as male and female in a marriage relationship? I think about what is written in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 24. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. What does it mean to be living as male and female? Sometimes I will have wives that will come to me and say, I just can't understand my husband. Well, that's a good, legitimate statement. And a lot of the reason why you can't understand your husband is because he is a male. I can see why you're frustrated. You got a legitimate frustration there. You are a female trying to live with a male. Or I will have a man who will say, I just cannot understand my wife. I have no idea where she's coming from. A lot of times, the reason why you can't understand your wife is because she is a female. A lot of times men think that their wives think like they do. God has created males and females to be equal. But God has created males and females to be very different. And so it's when we understand those differences that we can grow strong in our marriage. And we see that these differences are not anything that is to be a threat, or to say, I'm a male trying to live with a female. That seems to be impossible, but rather you see it as being a compliment, to say that God has created us males and females as a way to complement. God has created two sexes, not one sex, not four sexes, not 10 sexes, but two sexes. And those two are to complement each other. The two very different sexes complement each other to make a whole. And so, husbands, your wives are going to bring to you a strength. They are going to have things about themselves that you don't have, but that is going to be a strength to you. And the same thing, wives, your husband is going to be a strength to you because your husband is going to be very different than you. But those differences will be your strength. And so isn't that just kind of the way that it is in creation? It's like there's so many antitheses. And antithesis, that would be two things that are opposite. How many things that are opposite, so different. But yet it's these opposites that work and hold in a balance, actually working with each other to make for a whole. And so just think about all of the different antitheses that you can think about in life. There's hot and there's cold. They are so very different, but yet they hold in a balance and they complement. They complement each other. Or I think about night and day. There is the antithesis of light and darkness, but also male and female. So just like all antithesis, that there's male and female. So when you think about in an antithesis, that these hold in a balance, but one will have power over the other. I think about hot and cold. Now, here again, my science friends will tell me that heat actually has power over the cold. As much as they seem like they are equals, the heat will have a little bit more power over the cold. Or we think about light and darkness. Once again, it seems like these two very powerful things are equal, but yet light will have power over darkness. And so male and female, they're equal, but yet there is a little bit of a strength or a power that the male would have over the female. And so as we think about what the Apostle Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 5, that what the Apostle Paul is saying is that the husbands are to love their wives like Christ loves the church. And wives are to love their husbands like the church loves Christ. So here again, what Paul is saying is, once again, that in this antithesis, there would be strength that the male would have over the female as equal as they are. And so what the Apostle Paul is not saying here, because a lot of times he is misunderstood or misinterpreted, because a lot of times people think, well, what Paul is saying is that the man is, the more powerful one from the standpoint that the man can dominate over his wife. It almost gives the husband a license to be condescending and to dominate almost in an abusive way. Well, that's not what Paul is getting at all. That there's not to be any domineering. There is not to be any condescending. There's not to say, well, I am the head of the house. I'm the one who gives orders around here, and as I snap my fingers, boy, things better happen. That I'm the king of my throne here in this house, and my wife is my little subservient person that goes around just kind of waiting on me hand and foot. A lot of people think that that's what it is. But that's not what Paul is saying. Paul is saying is that the husband, if it's showing any power at all or a strength, it's that he is to be a loving man. That the Apostle Paul says is that the husband is to show such a powerful love. That the husband is to be the leader in that he leads in love. Nothing else. But that the husband is to demonstrate the most love. Okay, that is a strong husband that does that. The husband that leads in love. And there's nothing else to this equation. And the wife is to love her husband. And so I think about the church. Jesus initiates the relationship in love. That Jesus shows such a great love is that he dies on a cross for us. Now we as the church are to respond to Jesus in love. Now here again, as much as the church loves Jesus, our love will never be like Jesus' love. Hopefully the church continues to grow in its love for Jesus, but no matter how much it grows in its love for Jesus, that our love will never reach the love that Jesus has for us. And so that's the understanding here, is that a husband, you love your wife so much that you hold her in your love. And that love will never stop. And it will be an unconditional love where you're laying down your life for her. And that a wife is to grow in her love for her husband continually as the church grows in its love for Jesus. And so what this is saying, what Paul is saying here is that in Christian love is that a husband is to be leading his house in love. He's to be the leader of the house. And when a husband leads, that's a very attractive thing. I talk to a lot of women who say that they just love it when their husbands take on the leadership roles. Wives love it when their husbands are the ones who lead the family in prayer, who lead the family in devotions, reading God's Word. instructing the children in the ways of God, women will say, that is very attractive. I love my husband when he does that. Wives tell me how much they love it when their husbands take the family to church, when the husband is the leader. And so many of the reports and the studies that I see today show that when the father is present at worship and is showing leadership and showing the children how important it is to have a relationship with God, that the likelihood now of these children continuing on in their faith is very high. I mean, it's like around 80% chance that the children now will be continuing on in their relationship with God and being part of the church. But when the father is absent, and even though the mother is doing all that she can to be the example, to instill in her children the values of being a Christian and going to church, even with her best efforts, that the odds of her children then continuing on in the church are very low. I mean, we're talking like 18%. So it shows the power of a father's presence and influence on family life, and how the father's example will have a lot to determine just how strong the children will be as they grow in their faith. And I'll tell you what, women, they resent it when their husbands are couch potatoes, especially when it comes to the church. As the mother is taking, or in a sense dragging, the kids off to church, and the husband is sitting on the couch, she resents that. Or at least that's what the women have been telling me. When it is the mother, the wife, who is there with the children, making sure that they get their homework done and are tending to all of the things that are important about their life and about home, and the husband is sitting there like a couch potato, the wife resents that. It's not anything that is attractive. But a man who leads in love is a strong man and is a good husband, a good father. And I'll tell you what, that is attractive. And so it's not just, because I've seen I've seen husbands and fathers where basically the wife is the one who's taking the leadership, and the husband just basically has this blank attitude. Okay, I will go, and I'll go to whatever church you're dragging me to, and we will do whatever it is, just stop nagging me. No, that's not leadership. Leadership is when the husband says, we are going to church, and this is why we go to church. This is the importance of it. And I'm not just tagging along like the caboose of a train, but rather I am the engine that's leading the way. So what does it mean to be male and female? Well, men are by nature independent. Men, they like to be problem solvers. They resent it when somebody else comes and gives them unsolicited advice. Men want to be confident. Men like success. Men are into things like status, positions, titles. They want to have a sense of being important. They like to be in control of their life situation as far as work, their family, and their house. Men like to have approval and praise. Men generally do not confide in other people, in other men. Maybe there's one other person that a man will confide in. But normally, they keep all their thoughts and their concerns to themselves. Whereas women are more interdependent. Where women, they like to solve their problems together. If there's a problem, let's get together and we will talk about this and we will solve this problem. Women, they like to feel loved, secure, and validated. And so, oftentimes what happens in a marriage, a typical thing is that a husband and a wife, they will come home from work. The husband will sit down, he will turn on the TV to watch the news or a sports event. And his wife will come, and she will begin to start to have conversation with him. And right away, he's a little annoyed. Like he's really trying to hear, listen to the news or watch the game. And so he's kind of listening to his spouse. And what he's trying to figure out is, what is the point of her conversation? Or in other words, what is the problem here? And so he's listening just long enough to try to figure out what the problem is. And after he thinks he understands what the problem is, then he will give the readout. In other words, here's the solution to your problem. And so once he's given the solution to the problem, now basically it's time for her to leave so he can get back to watching whatever it is that he's watching, whether it be the news or the sports event. Well, now she's feeling a little put out because she didn't come to have conversation to basically have all of her problems solved, if she really even has a problem at all. No, she's coming to have conversation with him because she wants conversation, because that's how she is in relationship with him. It's like I'm coming here, there's no problem at all. And there may not even be any point to the conversation. Or the whole point of the conversation is that I want to be in relationship with you, and I'm in relationship with you as we converse. And so when a husband realizes that, then he will start to realize, he will start to think, okay, she's here because she loves me. She's here because she wants to be in relationship with me. And it will do a lot of good for our marriage right now if I turn off the TV and just be in conversation with her, even though there's no point to the conversation other than the point of being married. That I love her and she loves me. And so let's talk about something, even if it's not earth-shattering, or even if it's not going to solve all the world's problems today. And so that's part of living as male and female, is that the husband who wants to be the problem solver doesn't need to solve any problems in the marriage. Just listen. Enjoy her. But then, wives, it's also very important to realize when you are traveling with your husband and you're going to an unfamiliar place, to let him find where it is that you are going. I've had these experiences a number of times where I'm in an unfamiliar place, we're driving, we need to get to this place, and all of a sudden I am circling around this area, knowing that this place is somewhere close. It's like I can almost feel it, I can almost smell it, but I'm not finding it. And all of a sudden I'm hearing my wife say, Jeff, don't you think we should stop and get some directions to this place? That's not what a man wants to hear at this point. Because if I stop in at some kind of a convenience store to ask directions to this place, I'm losing a lot of my manhood in this moment. Because part of being a man is trying to figure it out for yourself. That I'm relinquishing a lot of my manliness by going in and asking. And so wives, remember that. Because once in a while, I finally will just say, with her demands, with my lovely wife who I love so much, with her demands saying, Jeff, stop, go in there, ask directions. You know what happens so oftentimes? I'll go in and ask directions, and I'll say, how do you get to this place? And they'll say, oh, it's just right across the street. Ugh. You know these GPS systems now, I think that's kind of replacing the dog as being a man's best friend. But wives, just remember, as hard as it is to see your husbands struggle, let them struggle. Eventually they'll figure it out, and then they will feel like a man. But it's frustrating for you as wives, I know. But understand that a man is programmed that way. But when we think about society, when we think about being male and female, is that a lot of being male and female, we may say, well, it's conditioned by society. Well, there's a certain amount of who we are that is conditioned by our society. But then there is a certain amount of who we are that just simply we are who we are because this is innately who we are. We were born this way. And no matter how much society tries to manipulate or to change us or to say or help us to see things in a different way, we're just simply going to be, we are who we are. I remember I was born in the early 1960s, and so I remember as a young kid in the 60s, and then also in the 70s. And in the 70s, I could see, because I was at that point entering into high school, that there was a big shift in society, just in terms of roles of males and females. Because I remember in the 60s, as I looked at my own family, but also the families of my friends, is that it was obvious that the husband, the father, was the breadwinner, whereas the wife, the mother, was the bread maker. And so society had its roles for male and females, and they were pretty defined. I mean, not just in terms of society, but also home life. There were those masculine jobs, and there were those feminine jobs. Masculine traits, feminine traits. And so those were pretty defined. The husband was in charge of things like mowing the lawn, cleaning the garage, taking out the trash, being the handyman, whereas the wife was more into doing the work of the inside of the home, cooking, doing the dishes, the vacuuming, the dusting, the laundry, and those kinds of jobs. But now there's been a shift in society where men and women are both out working, out in the workforce, and so now men and women, now husbands and wives, have to take care of all of the household needs. And so now sometimes the wife will be out mowing the lawn and the man will be in the house dusting. Okay, but I want you to know that even though roles in society have changed, that men still are men and women are still women, husbands and wives. And so I think about behind every successful man, there is a great woman. Now, I'm not saying that as kind of a chauvinistic statement, because the woman may be very successful in her own right. But still, a wife that is encouraging and building her husband is going to be a wife that is going to make her husband confident and successful. I knew of this couple where he was a classmate of mine at the seminary. He graduated number one in his high school class. He graduated number one in his college class. And now he was offered a great job out of college, but then he was called to go into the ministry. Well, the two of us, we went to this church where we worked as seminary students, and it was at this church that we were to deliver our first sermon. And I'll tell you, that's a big deal. And so I remember going down, with this other seminarian to the church where he was to give his first sermon for, in his life, and then his fiancée was with him. Well, I thought he did a great job. He preached his first sermon, and I have to admit, in all honesty, I thought he did a very good job. But when we got into the car, I was in the back seat, and he and his fiancée were in the front seat. And as soon as we got in the car, she just started ripping his whole sermon apart. The whole way back to the seminary, she was just telling everything about his sermon that was wrong. And I was just kind of listening to this thinking, ooh, here's this very highly confident young man who just gave a very good sermon, but if she's going to nitpick him to death throughout his life, it won't be long before he won't have any confidence at all. And so here a man needs to be affirmed. Whereas I think about women. I knew this gal where she was the highest paid doctor in the hospital. And had all of the respect of all the other doctors. But when she would come home, her husband would belittle her. Where she did not feel loved. She did not feel secure. She was not feeling validated. So even though she was the highest paid doctor, a highly successful person, that when she came home, she still wanted to be treated like a woman, to be loved, to be respected, to know that her husband cared and affirmed her. And so wives are to build up their husbands, and husbands are to affirm their wives and to validate their wives in those very important ways. Husbands, let your wives know that they're special. And so it is a man who initiates things in the relationship. A man says, I don't know why my wife is so cold. Well, you just say to him, well, because you've made her that way. Husbands, you initiate in the relationship. You tell your wife how much you love her, how much give her hugs, bring her flowers, give her chocolates. And when you do that, she will respond. She will blossom and bloom much like a flower that is receiving rain and sunshine. And she's going to love you for it. My wife doesn't like watching football. But when I'm kind to her, when I tell her that I love her, when I convey to her that she's special to me, pretty soon she's sitting next to me watching the football game. Not because she's interested in the football game, but she wants to be with me. So here again, understanding what it means to be male and female, when a couple figures that out, that will be a strength to their marriage.
On behalf of the Lutheran Church of Peace, I'm Robert Snyder. Thank you for watching our program, and please join us again for To Know Christ.